judge thought it would be a simple moment. A few warm-up questions, maybe a smile or two, and then they'd get on with the hearing. He didn't expect a 12-year-old girl to walk into his courtroom and take control without ever raising her voice. It was a cloudy afternoon in Toledo, Ohio, and the courtroom felt colder than usual. Maybe it was the humming air conditioning. Maybe it was something else, the kind of cold that seeps in when people aren't sure what to feel. On the stand sat Amani Jefferson, 12 years old, 5 feet tall, wearing a pale yellow cardigan that looked like it had been pressed with care. It always made her feel a little more confident, even if she never said that out loud. She wasn't trembling. She wasn't crying. She just sat still, hands folded, eyes focused. Across the courtroom, people couldn't help but glance at her. Reporters, caseworkers, a few strangers who had shown up out of curiosity. On the left, her foster parents, Deborah and Stan, sat stiffly, holding hands. On the right, her biological aunt, Celeste Boone, in a bright red blazer, clutched a tissue and a manila folder, her eyes darting between the judge and the girl she claimed to love. Judge Gerald Norwood had seen hundreds of cases in his career, maybe thousands. He was in his 60s now, with silver hair, a calm voice, and a pair of reading glasses that hung from his neck like a permanent accessory. He had a way of making the courtroom feel predictable, under control. But not today. He looked at Amani for a long moment, then finally spoke. "Miss Jefferson," he began, his voice measured. "I understand this isn't something a child should have to do. We don't take it lightly, asking someone your age to speak in a matter this serious." Amani nodded once. "I understand, Your Honor," she said. There was something in her tone, something calm, clear. It caught him off guard. He expected a child's nervous mumbling or shy glances, but she met his gaze like she had every right to be there, like she already knew how this day was going to go. He tried to shift the mood, just a little. "You seem pretty sharp," he said. "Do well in school?" "I do all right," she answered simply. He smiled. "Modest too." Then he leaned back in his chair, tapping the side of his folder. "Let me ask you something, just for fun. Ever sneak a cookie before dinner?" There was a pause. Amani tilted her head, studying him like he was the one on trial. "That's a leading question, Your Honor," she said. "You're assuming I have, instead of asking whether I did." A quiet laugh rippled through the gallery. Even the court reporter glanced up from her keys. The judge blinked in surprise, but the smile didn't fade. "Well then," he said, chuckling softly, "how about we play a little game to break the ice? Truth or lie, I ask you something. You say whether it's true or not." Amani paused, then nodded. "Okay, but I might ask questions too." He raised an eyebrow. "Fair enough." At first it was light. "All right, Miss Jefferson. Truth or lie? You stayed up past your bedtime more than once this week." "Truth," she answered, without flinching. "I was reading the 2022 edition of the Ohio Family Law Journal." The judge tilted his head. "The Family Law Journal?" "Yes, sir. It's public access. I was looking up the legal standards for custody rulings, specifically the part about best interest of the child." This time the courtroom didn't laugh. It just paused, listening more carefully now. "All right," the judge said, adjusting his seat. "Truth or lie? You ever pretend to be sick to skip school?" "Lie," she replied. "I haven't missed a day since 3rd grade." That's when Celeste's attorney, Mr. Rohr, a polished man with slicked back hair and a habit of speaking just a little too confidently, leaned forward. "Your Honor," he said, clearly uncomfortable, "I'd like to steer this back toward the relevant—" The judge raised one hand, no words, just a gesture that said, "Let her speak." Something had shifted. Everyone felt it. Judge Norwood sat forward. "My turn's up," he said quietly. "Go ahead, Miss Jefferson. Your question." Amani took a breath, not rushed, not dramatic, just enough to show she had thought about this moment. Then she asked calmly and clearly, "Truth or lie, you've already made up your mind about who I should live with." You could hear a pin drop. The gallery stopped moving. Celeste's fingers froze mid-tissue twist. Even the bailiff looked up. because it was no longer about a girl speaking in court. It was about a system being challenged, not with a shout, but with a question too honest to ignore. And for the first time that afternoon, the judge didn't have an answer ready. The moment her question landed, the entire courtroom froze. Even Attorney Rohr, who'd spent most of the day wearing smug confidence like a badge, sat back, suddenly unsure of himself. Judge Norwood hesitated, then gave a quiet sigh. "On truth," he admitted. Amani nodded, not with pride or triumph, but as if she already knew. "I figured," she said softly. She turned to face Celeste Boone, her aunt by blood, but not much else. Celeste sat upright now, her posture stiffening under the weight of the room's attention. "Truth or lie?" Amani asked. "You told the caseworker you could provide for me better than the Greers because you make more money." Celeste blinked. She didn't flinch, not yet. "Truth," she said slowly. "That's a fact." Amani didn't move. Her hands were still folded. "Then why," she asked calmly, "do the electric bills in your name show 4 late payments in the past 6 months?" A collective breath caught in the room, not gasps, just that subtle collective tension that moves through people when something true cuts through the noise. Celeste opened her mouth, then closed it. Without saying a word, Amani reached into her small cloth tote bag. She pulled out a folded sheet of paper and placed it carefully on the table in front of her. "Public records," she explained. "I looked them up at the downtown library last week. It's all there." Rohr practically jumped from his seat. "Objection, Your Honor. This is wildly inappropriate for a child witness." But Judge Norwood didn't raise his voice. He didn't have to. "It's relevant," he said flatly. Then turning slightly added, "Sit down, Mr. Rohr." Amani's voice remained calm. "Truth or lie," she said, looking straight at the judge. "A child's voice should matter in decisions about their own life." Norwood stared at her, this time with no smirk, no clever comeback, just a long, searching pause. "Truth," he finally said. Amani exhaled. It was the first visible release of tension in her small body since she sat down. "Then I'd like to speak for real now," she said. "Not about cookies, not about games, just the truth." Norwood gave one small nod. "You may speak, Miss Jefferson." The court clerk scribbled something on her pad. The stenographer's fingers never stopped moving. And Amani? She waited a full second before speaking, not because she was afraid, but because she was lining her thoughts up with the same precision as someone disarming a lock. "I've lived in 6 homes in 7 years," she began. Her voice was steady, clear. "Some of them were okay. One had a dog that liked to chew my socks. One smelled like onions and baby powder. One," she paused, "locked the fridge after 5 p.m. She wasn't looking for pity. There was no self-pity in her tone, just facts, offered with quiet clarity. "But the Greers?" she continued, glancing toward her foster parents. "They're different. They didn't ask me what happened to me. They asked what I like to eat, what books I like. They didn't treat me like a case file." Deborah Greer wiped a tear with her hand. Stan reached under the table and gently squeezed her palm. Amani turned to her aunt again. "Mrs. Boone," she said, "you told the caseworker that you should have custody because you're family, but you didn't come to visit me until the court got involved." Celeste shifted uncomfortably in her seat. "I'm not mad," Amani added quickly. "I just notice things. I've had to take care of myself for a long time, so I can tell when people show up because they have to, and when they show up because they want to." The judge said nothing. He didn't stop her. He just watched. "And do you want to know," Amani continued, "why I started reading about family law?" Norwood nodded slightly. "Because grown-ups kept making choices for me, in rooms like this one, talking over my head, saying things like, 'She's too young to understand,' or 'She'll adapt.' But I do understand." She leaned forward just a little, her voice growing softer, but no less certain. "I know what stability looks like. I know what it feels like to be scared. I know when someone's lying, especially when they're smiling while doing it." Not a sound in the room. She looked back at the Greers. "I know this isn't just about who wants me. It's about who knows me, who sees me." She swallowed, not because she was nervous, but because she was saying something she had waited years to be allowed to say. The Greers know I hum when I read. They know I eat my pizza backwards. They know I collect old bus passes and keep them in a shoebox, because for some reason, they make me feel like all the places I've been actually mattered. That last part lingered. You could feel it land like a small stone in still water, quiet but impossible to ignore. Roar leaned in to whisper something to Celeste, but she didn't respond. Then, unexpectedly, the judge leaned forward and asked, almost like a human being, not a figure in robes, "How old were you when you learned how to read legal documents?" Amani looked him in the eye. 9, she said. "I started with eviction." And that was the moment everyone in the courtroom stopped thinking of her as a kid. Judge Norwood stared at her, and for the first time since she walked into that courtroom, something in his face shifted. It wasn't pity, it was recognition. A softness crept into his features. Not the kind adults put on to make children feel better, but the kind that comes from remembering something personal, something painful. He sat back slowly in his chair and exhaled through his nose, steadying himself. "All right, Amani," he said quietly. "Thank you. That was..." He glanced at the papers in front of him, then back up at her. "Very helpful." She nodded once, her voice even. "I'm not done." He blinked. "You're not?" "No, sir. I'd like to address one of the affidavits filed in this case. There's incorrect information in it." A quiet murmur spread across the room. It wasn't loud, but it was sharp, focused. Attorney Roar straightened in his seat, instantly alert. "Which affidavit?" Judge Norwood asked. Amani reached into her tote bag again, as calm as ever. "This one," she said, unfolding a sheet of paper. "The one submitted by Celeste Boone." She held it up for the bailiff, who stepped forward to collect it. She stated in the filing that she lives in a 2-bedroom apartment, but this lease form shows it's a 1-bedroom unit. She looked directly at Celeste. "Which means I would have had to sleep in the living room." Celeste's cheeks flushed. That was a typo. Amani didn't flinch. "It's not just that. The lease is dated 2 weeks after the affidavit was filed, which means it wasn't just a mistake. It was submitted after the fact." Norwood narrowed his eyes. "Is this lease real?" "Yes, Your Honor. I got it from the building manager. I told him I was verifying housing stability for court. He let me see it when I showed him my school ID." Now the courtroom wasn't whispering. It was silent, not out of tension, but out of respect, because they were no longer watching a kid prove a point. They were watching her tell the truth, and do it with more clarity than most adults in the room had shown all day. Her fingers trembled slightly, but her voice hadn't, and in that moment, that mattered far more. Celeste sat back, her arms crossed tight. Her eyes jumped between Amani and her attorney, who now looked visibly uncomfortable. He leaned in again, whispering something this time she barely nodded at. Judge Norwood looked down at the document the bailiff had placed in front of him. "Ms. Boone," he said carefully, "is there anything on this lease that's inaccurate?" Celeste hesitated, then shook her head. "Number. But I didn't mean to mislead the court. I didn't think it would be an issue. I've made space for her. I used a curtain to separate the bed from the kitchen." Amani tilted her head. She wasn't cruel, just curious. "There's no door?" she asked gently. Celeste looked away. That was the thing about silence. It didn't always mean guilt, but sometimes it was louder than any lie. Judge Norwood exhaled and tried to shift gears. "Amani," he said, "you've clearly done your research, and you've impressed this court. But what about the emotional part of all this? Isn't it possible your aunt deserves a chance to reconnect with her family?" Amani nodded slowly. "Yes, but reconnecting doesn't have to mean uprooting. It means calling, visiting, sending a birthday card even when there's not a court date coming up." That landed harder than anything she'd said so far. Celeste's lips parted slightly, like she wanted to protest, but couldn't. Amani kept going, softer now. "I know people say blood is thicker than water, but water is what keeps me alive. I don't need people who look like me. I need people who see me." That was the moment Deborah, her foster mother, broke down. No quiet tear this time, just the full weight of everything they'd built and everything they might lose. Stan pulled her close without a word, both their hands locked together under the table. Across the room, Attorney Rohr finally stood up again, looking more rattled than before. "Your Honor," he said firmly, "this has turned into an emotional performance. With all due respect, we're here to talk about stability, structure, and capability, not speeches." Norwood didn't even turn toward him. "She just gave us all three," he said. Amani sat back in her chair, folded her hands again, calm as ever. Then she looked at the judge once more. "May I ask one more question, Your Honor?" He nodded slowly. She tilted her head slightly. "Truth or lie?" she asked. "Have you ever had to grow up before you were ready?" Norwood didn't answer, not with words. He just gave a long, heavy blink and looked down at his desk. And what he didn't say told Amani everything she needed to know. Outside the courthouse, the sun had started to shift. That late afternoon light, bright but low, slid through the high windows, spilling across the polished floor like it was looking for something to hold on to. Amani sat still in that light, not shaking anymore, but she could feel the weight of every eye on her. Not like she was a witness, not even like she was a child, but like she was someone whose words couldn't be ignored anymore. Not today, not again. Judge Norwood leaned forward again, but this time, something had changed. The casual tone he'd used earlier was gone. No small talk, no warmth masking discomfort. His voice was steady now, measured, precise. "Miss Jefferson," he began, his eyes fixed on hers, "my decision has to be based on what's best for your long-term well-being. That means emotional, financial, and physical stability, not just who presents themselves best in a single hearing." Amani didn't look away. "I understand," she replied, "but I needed to be heard today. Not because I'm trying to win anything, but because sometimes the truth gets buried under paperwork, and people forget there's a real person inside that file." The room went still again, quiet, but not hollow. Then, for the first time since the hearing began, Celeste stood up. Her voice, when it came, wasn't defensive. It wasn't rehearsed. It was human. "I didn't come earlier," she said, eyes on Amani, "because I didn't know how to. I wasn't ready to be anyone's guardian. I was still trying to figure out my own life." Amani gave one small nod. Not bitter, not cold, just honest. "I know," she said. "That's why I'm not angry." She paused, then added quietly, "I just can't afford to be someone's learning curve." That line landed like stone in water, silent but deep. No one in that room was breathing normally anymore. And Rohr, the attorney who'd spent hours prepping, didn't move. Maybe he knew there was nothing left to say. Norwood glanced toward Deborah and Stan. "Mr. and Mrs. Greer, would you like to say anything?" Deborah shook her head slowly, tears in her eyes. Stan cleared his throat, voice rough. "We came here ready to fight for her," he said, "but she fought for herself. I think that says more about who she is than anything we could say about who we are." No reaction, just gravity, the kind of quiet that shifts a courtroom from a place of procedure to something personal. Norwood looked back at Amani. "You've clearly read a lot of legal documents," he said. "Yes, sir." "Then you know," he continued, "this ruling won't come today. I'll need time to review the new information. We'll reconvene before any final decision is made." She nodded. "I know, but now at least, you see me? That's all I wanted." She rose slowly, slipping the lease document back into her tote bag like it was just another library printout. But it wasn't. It was proof. A turning point. A reminder that not all files stay silent. And as she walked back to her seat, quiet, measured, steady, no one in that courtroom saw her the same way anymore. The judge recessed the hearing, but no one moved. It was as if standing up too quickly might shatter whatever had just happened in that room. Norwood exited through a side door. The clerk followed. A pen scratched across a legal pad somewhere. A chair creaked, but mostly there was stillness. Amani sat between Deborah and Stan again, small in size, but somehow larger than anyone else in the room. Deborah leaned toward her. "You okay, baby?" Amani nodded. "Yeah, just tired." Stan gave a short laugh. "You just cross-examined 3 adults, dismantled a housing affidavit, and held your own in a courtroom. That would exhaust anyone. Amani smiled, tired but present, then looked down at her hands. Do you think he's going to send me away? Deborah opened her mouth, but Stan beat her to it. No one's sending you anywhere without a fight. And from what I just saw, you fight better than most adults I've ever met. Across the aisle, Celeste sat alone. Her lawyer was already across the room, whispering into his phone. She stared at her purse for a long moment, like it might offer answers it didn't have. Then she stood and slowly walked toward Amani. Amani, she said softly. Deborah turned, protective, but Amani looked up and met her aunt's eyes. I wanted to say something, Celeste began. Not because I expected to change anything, just because I should have said it before. Amani listened. I wasn't ready, Celeste continued, and I lied, because I thought looking like I had everything together mattered more than just being honest. She took a breath. Her voice shook. But you reminded me that the truth matters, especially when it's hard. Amani said nothing at first. Then she nodded, barely. It wasn't forgiveness, not yet, but it was a beginning. For a moment, Amani didn't respond. She just looked at Celeste, really looked. Then she asked simply, "Why do you want me?" The question didn't come out sharp. It wasn't loaded with anger, but it landed with weight, because it was real. Celeste blinked. Her mouth opened, closed. Then finally, she found something honest. Because I didn't want my sister's child to grow up thinking no one in her family cared. Amani nodded, slowly. That's not the same, she said, as wanting me. Celeste didn't argue. She just nodded. I know. Deborah reached out gently and touched Amani's hand, but didn't try to pull her away. This moment didn't belong to her. If the court decides you stay with the Greers, Celeste added, I'll respect that, but I'd still like to visit. Not because of a court order, just, if you want me to, when you're ready. Amani studied her again, not with suspicion, but with the same care she gave any document before she trusted what it said. Okay, she said. We'll see? Celeste stepped back, gave her space, and that, in itself, was a start. Later, in the hallway outside the courtroom, Amani walked beside the woman who'd been her caseworker, Kendra Lawson, mid-30s, glasses that never quite stayed up on her nose, and the kind of weariness you only get from giving your heart to too many stories that didn't end well. You did something rare in there, Kendra said, voice soft but steady. Amani shrugged. I told the truth. Yeah, Kendra replied, but you didn't use it like a weapon. You used it like a mirror, made everyone take a look. Amani looked up at her. That's the only way it works, right? Kendra didn't answer with words. She just nodded, no longer a worker in the system, but a witness to what had just happened. By the time they stepped outside, the sun had shifted lower in the sky. The light wasn't softer, but it felt more honest. The air didn't feel lighter, just real, and that was enough. What came next wouldn't be up to the court alone. It would be up to Amani too. 2 weeks later, a plain white envelope arrived at the Greers' home in Akron, Ohio. No fanfare, no stamps that screamed official business. Just a single name typed neatly across the front, Amani Jefferson. Inside was the decision, typed in clear, direct language. No flourish, no loopholes, no confusion. The court had granted permanent guardianship to Deborah and Stan Greer. There was no party, no balloons, just 3 people sitting at a kitchen table, quietly holding the weight of the moment. Amani read the letter twice, carefully, then set it down and said softly, I guess this means I can stop packing my bag every night. Deborah leaned over and gently brushed her shoulder. That bag can stay empty now, sweetheart. You're home. Stan raised his glass of orange juice with a smile. To the girl who took on the system, armed with nothing but the truth and a tote bag. They all laughed. For real this time. Not like in court, the kind that fills a room and clears it out all at once. Amani smiled, but her eyes stayed steady. Can we still visit Aunt Celeste, if she wants to? Of course, Deborah said. You get to choose what those visits look like. This isn't a wall. It's just the door you walked through. Amani nodded. She didn't need revenge. She didn't need apologies wrapped in guilt. She needed consistency. And now, she had it. Weeks passed. The tote bag stayed under her bed. The shoebox full of bus passes grew thicker. And one day, at a community outreach event, she handed Judge Norwood a letter through Kendra. It wasn't typed. It was written in her own hand. Thank you for not treating me like a kid who talks too much. Thank you for listening when it actually mattered. I hope more kids get the chance to speak for themselves, not just be spoken for. Also, I was serious about the cookies. I really never snuck one. Just Amani. And that was the story. Not of a girl who found a home, but of a girl who knew what one looked like and kept speaking until someone finally listened. Because the truth is, kids don't need us to speak for them as often as we think. They just need us to hand them the mic and step back. Kids like Amani exist in courtrooms, in classrooms, in foster homes, in every quiet corner of the world where people rarely ask what they think, but they do think. They know, they see, and when they speak, we owe them more than applause. We owe them respect. So if you're a teacher, a parent, a judge, a social worker, or even just someone who cares about young people, ask them, listen to them. Not when it's convenient, when it matters, because chances are it already does. And if you're a kid like Amani, don't wait for permission to speak your truth. Say it. Even if your voice shakes, especially then.